Now, who is it that's more likely to be expelled? Well, we asked teachers these questions too. Who is it in your classroom that's being expelled? In mixed age classrooms, where you have 3 and 4-year-old children, 4-year-olds are about 50% as likely as 3-year-olds, 50% more likely than 3-year-olds to be expelled. We didn't have any idea as to why that would be, so we asked a bunch of teachers, preschool teachers again, why would it be in a national study that teachers would say that 4-year-olds would be more likely to be expelled than 3-year-olds? And you know what they said? They said, after they thought about it, it's one thing if you have a child who has behavior problems and the child's this big, and it's different if the child's this big. And we said, well, why? Why does the height of the child matter in terms of whether the child's going to be expelled? And they said, well, if the child is smaller, then the child might be smaller than the other children. But if the child's bigger, then the child might be bigger than other children, and maybe someone will get hurt. And that was one of our first clues. It's not the behavior of the child. It's our perceptions of what that behavior means. And whether we think that's going to cause somebody else to be hurt or harmed along the way, we know that our black children are expelled at twice the rate of our white children. We know that boys are expelled at 4 times the rate of girls. That's what we found in the study that we released back in 2005. And so when you put it together, there's 3 B's of risk for children being expelled from preschool programs. You have big, black, and boy. Those are the risk factors. And the more of those that reside in a single child, the more likely that child is to be expelled or to receive the decision that we are not going to be able to meet your needs in this program, and that child be expelled. Now, the Congressional Black Caucus did some encouraging for the U.S. Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights a few years ago, and encouraged them to start collecting data on children being expelled from preschool programs and to collect that information on the basis of race and gender. And when they did that, they basically found exactly what we had found about a decade or so earlier. As a matter of fact, you can see some of that information on this side here. And in particular, look at the June 2016 data that they released out of the U.S. Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights. Black preschoolers expelled at black preschoolers are 3.6 times as likely to be suspended as white preschoolers. Now, what we were finding was about a twice over expulsion rate difference, and what they're finding now about a decade later is actually even more racial disparity than what we had originally reported. So now why is it then that our black children, our boys, and in particular our black boys are more likely to be expelled? We can point our fingers at a lot of different potential things. We know from a lot of science that boys tend to show more outward symptoms of stress. So if they're experiencing stress in the home, stress in the environment, stress in the community, they may be more likely to show outward, sort of acting out symptoms of that. So maybe that's part of the reason why our boys are more susceptible to being expelled or suspended. We know our children of color oftentimes have more stressors in their life simply because they're more likely to live in homes and in communities that are dealing with financial challenges. We also know that our children of color are more likely to attend lower resourced programs. They're more likely to go to child care programs that are of unknown quality because they're unlicensed, or they're operating under the radar, or if we do know what the quality is, typically we find that it's far less quality in that program or far less resources than the more affluent white peers are attending to. So maybe all of these might account for some of it, but even when we add all these things together, it just doesn't seem to be enough to account for the sheer magnitude of the disparities. And so we wanted to entertain whether or not there were other things, in particular, the potential role of implicit bias that might explain why we see these disparities in the likelihoods of a child being expelled from preschool programs. What we did was this. We had the teachers sit down, and it was a 2-part study. And in the first part, they sat down, and we gave them a screen to watch. And it was a video about 6 minutes long. And on the video, there were preschool children playing and interacting. And there was an eye tracker that's attached to the screen that can track exactly where on the screen they're looking, right down to the pixel, right down to the millisecond. So we know exactly where they're looking on the screen. And then we give them these instructions. We say, now you're ready to view a series of video clips lasting 6 minutes. We're interested in learning how teachers detect challenging behavior in the classroom. Sometimes this involves seeing behavior before it becomes problematic. The video segments you're about to view are preschoolers engaging in various activities. Some clips may or may not contain challenging behaviors. Your job is to press the Enter key on the external keypad every time you see a behavior that could become a potential challenge. And the experimenter, Maria, demonstrated for them exactly how to do that. Please press the keypad as often as needed. That's what we told them. And they had the headphones on and they were watching the screen. What we didn't tell them was this: there are no challenging behaviors in any of these video clips. In fact, the children are child actors that we were utilizing, and we were setting up into a typical looking kind of preschool scenario, children around a table. And the children were racially and gender balanced. We had a black boy, a black girl, a white boy, and a white girl. And what we were really doing here is not looking to see how quickly you can find behavior problems, because there aren't any, but rather when we lead you to believe that a child might misbehave, who do you look at? Who do you go to first? Who do you keep going back to? If you think you missed a behavior because certainly somebody misbehaved, who do you go back to look at? This is sort of like the equivalent of if we were studying mall cops and who do you follow in the mall? You know, who are you following with your eyes in the preschool classroom if you're a teacher and you think that a child is going to misbehave? Basically what we found was that when you look at the amount of time that teachers were spending looking at different children, teachers look more and spend more time looking at black children, especially the black boy. And then when you ask them who they're looking at, they think they're looking more at boys, especially the black boy. Either way, it's the black boy that's coming out on the short end of the stick. It's more time spent actually watching that child's behavior, more time in more cases, the teacher's actually feeling like they're watching that child's behavior. One of the things that we also found out about this is that these results were true regardless of the race of the teacher. And so across races of teachers, this was true. This was true for white teachers, and this was also true for our African American teachers in terms of watching black children more and spending more time, especially watching the black boy when challenging behavior was expected. Now, the second part of the study, we gave the teachers a description of a challenging behavior, a very challenging behavior of a child who maybe hits other children, scratches other children, maybe occasionally hits the teacher, doesn't follow lots of instructions very well. And then we asked the teacher to pretend this child is in your classroom and rate how severe this behavior problem is. But where it became interesting is that we also randomized the teachers to receive different names associated with this story. Everybody got the same story, but they were led to either believe that the child might be an African American boy or girl or a white boy or girl using stereotype names that tend to evoke images of children based on different types of races and genders. And then the extra part where it gets extra interesting is that we randomized the teachers to receive or not receive a second paragraph. The second paragraph was a paragraph that described the home life of the child. Mom works 3 jobs, barely making ends meet. We think she's depressed, doesn't have the resources to be able to get treatment. We don't know much about dad because he's not around much, but when he is around, mom and dad fight a lot, and sometimes it's physical, and the child sees this. What we were interested in this is it possible that we can find bias in the way in which we view behaviors, but if you know something about the family, if you know something about mom and dad and the family and the community that might help explain why this child might be having some challenging behaviors, is it possible that would create empathy and attenuate the bias, reduce the amount of bias? That maybe the cure, or at least part of the cure for bias, is just knowing each other a little bit better. And what was interesting was this: when we looked at the results, the second paragraph worked, but only kinda. It only worked if the race of the teacher was the same as what she thought was the race of the child. And if that was the case, getting the second paragraph made the teacher feel this isn't all that bad. I can understand where this behavior is coming from. But if the race of the teacher was different than what she thought was the race of the child, it made her perceive the behavior problems as being worse. And that's where it gets really challenging for us in terms of trying to think about exactly where we go with anti-biasing efforts, because it's probably not just enough to have our teachers understand our families more if they don't have a cultural frame by which to understand that information. And if they have no cultural frame by which to understand that information actually might be overwhelming for them, and it might make situations seem even more dire or even more hopeless.